Today what I'd like to do is I would like to show you how to make a slab tripod cup that has texture on it. The cups that I have here, the finished examples, show the kind of texture that was used to create the texture on the clay. These are textured mats. They are basically like a rubber stamp. This one is a slightly different material. It might be silicone. And then this one over here was created using a foam pad that goes underneath rugs, and by placing it and rolling it on there, it creates a great texture. Now, the idea behind using textured slabs is to utilize a glaze that will help to enhance the texture and not cover it up. So all of these are great texture showing glaze that I had chosen. These are actually part of the Celadon series. I use the Coyote glazes, and it's the Celadon series of Coyote, and Celadon glazes have a transparency where they build up in the textures and you can see through. So just make sure that you're utilizing a nice texture showing glaze. Let me put these to the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by showing you how I'm going to roll out my slab and texture it. So you want to take your clay, make sure you have nicely wedged clay, and before rolling it, I do flatten it quite a bit. Now I have more clay than will be necessary, but I'd rather have a little bit more than I need and trim off some than not have enough. If you don't have enough on your slab, you can't just stick more clay on there. What you really need to do is re-wedge it and start all over again. So I'm starting off by flattening it before I start rolling it. Now, when I roll, I always make sure that I have a clean rolling pin. If your rolling pin is dirty or your rolling pin is kind of wet, it's going to get stuck to the clay. Now, my students know that we have canvas covered tables. If you're not one of my students, you want to work on fabric or canvas, because if you work directly on, say, wood or formica, it will get stuck. So as I roll this out, I want to try to keep it even and consistent, and I am going to use slab sticks to get the thickness that I want. Now, for my students, you all know that I have various thicknesses of slab sticks. These are 1/4 of an inch, and I also have 3/8 of an inch. Now, I have painted my slab sticks, color coordinated, so for my students, you want to use the slab sticks that have the red on the end. Now, I'm going to go ahead and roll out more, and I should show you, this is the size that I actually need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually trim some of this way, and I will roll it out to get to the final thickness, but I need some tools first. So I'm going to just trim away some of the excess clay, so when I roll it out, it will become a little easier. I don't have to roll out all that excess. Now, students of mine, this is the kind of stuff that you can just squirt down with a water bottle and put in the bag, and it can be reused. Although I do have pug mills in class, it's nice to learn to recycle your clay as much as you can by hand. All right. So notice I lift it up and I release it from the canvas every couple of rolls. The reason that you release it from the canvas is, of course, it does get embedded into the canvas. Let me just trim away a little bit more. Okay. And you know that you're at the final thickness when you can hear the rolling pin on the slab sticks. So I am down to my 1/4 of an inch thickness. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do, I can set my sticks to the side. What I'm going to do for my texture is, rather than use these mats, which all are great, I'm going to use something different. I'm going to use a found object. Okay, lace makes a wonderful found object. I happen to have a larger lace one here that I'm going to use, and what I'm going to do, I think I'll use this side better, I like it better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to position this where I want it, and I'm going to gently and evenly roll this into the clay. Now, I really don't want to thin the clay that much. I just want to embed this lace into it some. There we go. And I can peek up and look at a corner. I might just do that just a little bit more. I want to make sure that my texture is going to be nice and kind of a heavy texture because I really want that glaze to show. Okay, I think that's kind of peeking up through it enough now. Oh yeah, that's a great texture. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lift it again from the canvas, and I have a pattern, a pre-cut pattern that I have used to make my cups in the past. This pattern makes this size cup, and I'm going to position my pattern on there so I have a little bit of a bare edge up at the top. The reason that I like to do a bare edge is because when you put your mouth on it, it feels funny when you have a texture sometimes. On all of these, I usually either rib down the texture, or in this case, I just left the texture off of that area. So, using a needle tool, I like to trim away the outside. And I like a needle tool rather than a knife, quite simply because I don't end up by gouging the paper as easily. Now, I happen to be using a waxy sort of paper. It's a stencil paper, but any paper will do. Construction paper is what my students typically use. I just had this stencil paper from years and years ago, and I can't even tell you how many times I've used this particular stencil. Okay, so that looks good. I have my lace pattern on there. I have a nice kind of a smooth edge where I can put my lips eventually. One thing that I didn't do that I really could have done is I could have ribbed this slab prior to us putting the texture on. I forgot. Not a big deal, but it is a nice thing to do if you can. Okay, so what I did was I just thinned that edge just a tiny bit there, and I will clean that up later. Maybe I'm gonna just trim that off just one more time because I do have kind of a ridge on there. It's a little bit thinner. There we go. I will definitely smooth that later. If you look at all my cups, it's all been smoothed on that top edge. There we go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this into a cylindrical form. Now, when you are making something like this into a cylinder, it's actually kind of difficult to bring these two seams, these two edges together, and to make a nice flush seam. So what I like to do is I like to do a bevel on each side. Now, I'm going to take my knife and hold it at an angle. So I create a bevel, about a 45-degree bevel. Now, I'm going to hold my knife at the very same angle and create a bevel on the other edge. So, in other words, it's an undercut on this side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep my ends. There we go. I'm going to prep that. I am going to add my slip, which in this case I could use water or vinegar. And then I'm going to loop this around, and now you can see when you bring that seam together and it has a bevel, it really goes together nicely. It actually overlaps. It's a much more secured seam. Okay, I'll put my hand in there and gently press. Now, it is up to you if you would like to have a smooth, blended look where you can't see the seam. Personally, I like to see the seam a lot of times on these. I have a seam in here. I don't even try to hide them. My seam is in here on this one. Most of the time I do put it under the handle, but I like the seam because it tells the user the process. When someone uses it, they can see that seam and they understand, oh, that was made by using a slab. Okay, so Now I have my seam connected on the outside, but it's not yet blended on the inside. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a tool, and I do like these little wooden tools, and I'm going to gently support the seam on the exterior as I push together and blend that seam on the inside. Now do remember, scoring and slipping is vital. If you fail to score and slip on one of these seams, it will blow apart on you eventually. Okay, now I'm going to do this other side. Notice I'm supporting it on the opposite side with my hand. Okay, now this is my top, this is my bottom. What I'm going to do next is I am going to make a tripod cup. I'm going to position this so my top, which is down here, my top looks round. Okay, I'm going to put the seam here, I'll put it this way so you all can see it. I'm going to put the seam on one of the corners. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by kind of making an equilateral triangle. My goal is to have the tripod even. So I can now take a scoring tool, I'm going to score the exposed edges. Now the key thing that I'm going to do here is when I bring this together, I'm not going to attempt to bring it together all the way in the center. I am going to have a little triangular hole that's visible. Okay, so I'm going to slowly bring this down, bring this together. The clay begins to touch the other seam. There we go. Now you can see the nice curve that I'm getting because of the tripod. But I have a hole. If you take and squeeze it together, you could eventually make it fit, but it's not really going to look that good. If you do that, it usually ends up by flattening out your legs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a small plug, and the plug is going to be a little bit thicker than the clay walls, but I want it to be able to fit down in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to score, and remember this was already scored and slipped, so if I go ahead, kind of insert that plug in there, there you go. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this in place, and I'm going to push it up from underneath, so I'm holding it in place. I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to blend. So I want to take all that excess clay that was on the inside, and I am pushing it down and using that to blend that little plug. Okay. Now this part is a little tricky, and notice I am holding this. If I had this sitting on the table, I would be flattening it out, and I don't want to flatten it out. Okay, let's turn that back over again. Take a look there. That looks good. Okay, now what I want to do is down in the corners, there are deep corners in each of those little feet. So I'm going to add a little clay, and I'm going to first add just a little water or slip, and I'm going to make little bean size pieces. Bean, or if you want to do round like a pea, and I'm just going to kind of put them down in there. A little bit more clay on that one. I'm going to put them down in there in each of the corners of the tripod, and then I'm going to take these and blend these. Now I like to do this because it does give me a little extra clay right down there in the bottom of the tripod. It makes it a little bit more secure, stable, less cracking, you know, would happen on the outside. But really, I like this from a functional standpoint. If I'm going to put hot chocolate in this cup, and the hot chocolate settles down there in the little corners of the tripod, if you don't have these little bean things in here, it's a pain to try to clean that out. So the little plugs are going to be rounding out those corners. So the corners aren't nearly as deep now. Okay. All right. So hopefully you can kind of see down in there, I'm hoping. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this and make sure it's level. So if I get my eyes down level with it, I want to look at the tripod and make sure that the feet appear that they're kind of level. And it is. So that's good. I'm pretty level right now. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create that belly that I have on these cups. This by itself would be a fine cup like this. But the neat thing about doing the texture on here is if I create the belly, it will help to accent the texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fingers, notice how I'm supporting above and below, and I take my fingers on the inside and I just gently push out. Now this obviously has to be done when the clay is plastic. You can't build this, let it sit for a day, get leather hard, and then expect to do this. This part has to be done when it's plastic. Now, you remember a little while ago I said I forgot to rib with the rib prior to texturing. If you rib it before you texture, it will help to control some surface cracks that might appear. Now, when I get over here to this point with the seam, I still want it to belly out, but I do use a great deal of care as I push out here. I kind of hold that seam a little bit, so I'm kind of pushing the seam together as I do it as well. Okay, now part of the key to this also is making it look like it's somewhat uniform. So I think about making sure that it's going out the same distance and maybe going up the same distance. I'm going to bring the belly up just a little bit farther, closer to the rim. There we go. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to show you what I can do in the plastic stage on the first day. Then I'll let it get leather hard, and then I'll come back after it's leather hard and I'll show you how to finish that. Okay, that's looking kind of good. And then what I want to do here is I just want to flare out this rim ever so slightly, and I will clean that up and make it look tidy and uniform later when it's leather hard. But I kind of like that little flare that happens there. Okay. All right, so I plugged the corners with the little bean size. I plugged the very bottom with a triangle. I made a belly, and I kind of flared out the top a little bit. Okay, one of the last things that I can do on this first day is I can go ahead and make a handle, and then I can also allow that to get leather hard with the cup. I will store it with the cup. Now to make a handle, if you saw my other video with the little pinch cups that we made, I did show handle making with that. What I'm going to do is the same style of handle, but I'm going to texture it before bending it. So I'm going to start off with a carrot that I kind of twist the ends in opposite directions, and then I'm going to roll. All right. So I'm going to roll it so I have a nice carrot formed handle. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten it. I just took off some of the excess there. I'm going to take it and I'm going to smack it down, and I'm going to flatten it. This is called the carrot slam method. Learned this years ago from Sandi Pierantozzi. I'm going to hold the big fat end. I'm going to take my sponge. Now when I take my sponge, I'm going to push down with my forefinger. I'm going to go in from the sides with my thumb and my other fingers. So what I'm doing is kind of sculpting it, and I'm pulling up on the big fat end, so it's also lengthening it. Okay. Now, if I want to put that same lace texture on here, notice how I did wipe off the moisture. If I want to put that same lace texture on here, I'll line it up like that. And then you could use a small pony roller, The big roller here is really kind of overkill for this. Or if you have something where you can press it in with a rib, that works really well too. I do like that little pony roller that we have in our bins though. So I'm going to take my fingers, because it got a little fat there in the middle. If I take my fingers, I can then kind of sculpt this and get that to a thinness that I like. So the reason that I do this as opposed to a slab is I really don't like the look of a slab handle. I feel that slab handles quite often have sharp edges on them. So if you guys remember, when you make a handle, if you position it on something plastic like a tray, or if you have a plastic bag over a board, that would work. But don't put it directly on wood, because the wood will dry it out. What I do is I will position it into the arc that I like. I will put my cup over here with it. Okay. When I position this, I'm going to position it upside down, so the weight is off the feet. There we go. And then the handle I would cover kind of tightly, and just a real light covering over the rest of that. If that dries out a little bit, that's fine. Okay, so that's how I would position it, and I would come back tomorrow when they're both the same moisture, and then I'll show you how to attach. Okay? Okay, so I have now stored my tripod cup and the handle together overnight, and they are leather hard. What I would like to do now is I would like to show you how to finish off this cup and attach the handle. So one of the first things that I will do is I'm going to look on the inside of the cup, and I'm going to try to tidy that up. My cup is a little bit stronger than it was last night. The feet have kind of stiffened up slightly, so it shouldn't be as flexible and as prone to collapsing. So I will still support the bottom here, but I'm going to come in here and just tidy up the bottom and take out some of the excess clay that I still had in there from the tripod. Okay, so that's a little bit cleaner. And now I'm going to take a paintbrush, and I'm going to smooth out my tool marks with a paintbrush. I like the paintbrush, the stiff bristled paintbrushes, for smoothing something like this, because it's almost impossible for me to get my hand down in there. There we go. I don't know if you can see that. That's much cleaner now. Okay. Next, I'm going to go ahead and think about my handle attachment. When I attach a handle, I typically would hold the handle behind the form where I plan to put it. So if I hold it like this to you, hopefully you can see, I would not put it on like this. That would be huge. I'm going to trim it. So if I put it behind it, I can kind of estimate where I'm going to be trimming it off. So for this handle, if I look down here, I'm going to, there we go. I'm going to estimate right here to trim and here to trim. So I'm going to take my knife, and I try to trim level, because sometimes it's easy to trim at an angle. So if you try to trim that level, it certainly helps. And then I'll trim down here. All right, so I now have trimmed off the excess, and I'm positioning my handle over the seam of the cup. You don't have to, but I kind of like it there. And I'm going to just round this a little bit more, since the form of the cup is quite round on the side. I want the handle to kind of mimic where it's going to attach. All right, so now that I have the location, okay, I can mark this. There we go. And I'm going to score both parts, and I'm going to score the handle quite well as well. Okay, and then I'm going to slip So I'm just going to use a little water there. Now as I position this on, I want to hold my hand on the inside of the pot, so as I push against the wall I don't hurt the wall or change the shape of it. And then very carefully in here I'm going to take one of these little tools and I'm going to blend the bottom part, and I'm going to try not to disturb my texture too much. Now up here at the top of the handle, if you would like, I do enjoy adding a little bit of a coil. Sometimes I find that it adds a little extra stability for me. So if you're the least bit concerned, you can add a coil on there to help attach that a little bit more securely. And the same thing down here. I'll just add a little coil in both places. So I have a little coil, I scored, I slipped, I actually just dunked the coil right in water. I'm using part of the handle that I cut off. The reason I'm doing that is because I know it's going to be the same moisture as the handle. I'd rather use that than brand new clay that's a little too wet. Okay, so I've scored and slipped, I placed that in there, and now I'm going to use my little wooden tool to help blend. Use whichever end works best and easiest for you. Okay, so by adding these little coils in here, you just add a lot of stability. It will help to anchor that on, so hopefully it won't be prone to cracking. And then I'll hold the bottom of the handle as I blend this one as well. And again, I try not to damage the great texture that I have on this cup. Okay, and once this is blended, I want to take my paintbrush with a little bit of water and tidy up the tool marks. And if you have damaged your texture, sometimes you can go back in there with a tool and kind of re-sculpt it. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger, tidy up the rim, and that is how you finish off a textured slab tripod cup. There we go.